Hello, hey, hi everyone. Very good afternoon to everyone. Okay, today is our fifth day of our lunchtime webinar, organized by the Marketing Institute of Singapore. And thank you for coming today. Now, we have already conducted our past 4 days on our MIS webinar itself, and we're certainly very excited to see even more people attending today's session. In fact, today we have a powerhouse, yet another powerhouse, Mr. Kevin Ryan, here to speak to us on the art of presenting charts and figures. I think in my course of work, I've seen a lot of presentations, and it's always about numbers, numerical numbers itself. And I've always asked the one that's presenting, can we have charts? Can we have pie charts, bar charts? And really, it actually draws a sort of a comparison on the numbers that are being presented. I believe today our speakers today, Mr. Kevin, will be touching more on the technique of doing that. Now, before that, I would really like to give word of thanks to our past 4 speakers since day 1 till yesterday. Mr. Raymond Thomas, Timothus Lee, Tyler Slim, and Ms. Bhavani yesterday. In fact, yesterday was a very exciting session. It was supposed to be an hour, but we ended up with Q&As that we have to stretch another 20 minutes just to finish our Q&A itself. So certainly today I'll probably be expecting the same thing coming. So if you do have any questions, you are always welcome to put it at the Q&A button. So just click on the button itself. You can send us your questions anytime, and we'll be able to pick that up, address it to our speaker, Mr. Kevin, after his sessions. Okay, and of course, in this moment, I would also like to give word of thanks to all the staff of the Marketing Institute of Singapore that's been working tirelessly over the past few days, preparing for the week-long webinar sessions. So thank you to all the staff, especially our marketing manager. I think she's really worked very hard, and of course the rest of the team itself. And of course, to give a word of thanks to Essential Werkz, just in case you would wonder why Essential Werkz. Okay, they were the one who actually helped us to put up the platform, and it's my company though. So all my guys are volunteering their time for this. So, okay, a word of thanks to all of them. Now, of course, I think we had a great turnout yesterday. We've also seen some of our friends from the Asia Marketing Federation, some of the presidents from our Asia Marketing Federations, just to name a few, Mr. Kim, Mr. Rohan, and today we have with us someone from Philippines, which I really want to give a word of thanks to Ms. Gwen. She's our immediate past president of the Asia Marketing Federation and the past president of the Philippine Marketing Association. Okay, I would like to touch on this before we move on to the presentation. Now, MIS, we are actually doing a corporate social responsibility projects, which we have been asking for mass donations over the past few days. And to date, we have received quite a good response, as in they were asking, how can we send the masks? Where should we send to? Now, in any case, all these masks that are being donated by our corporate members and members, or including the member of public itself, right? We will be sending our masks to our counterparts in Philippines. So as you know, not all of them are like Singapore, that we're very fortunate to have our government distributing masks. And in fact, we see a lot of those from developing countries like Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, some of our neighboring ASEAN countries. They're living their day-to-day right now without any masks. So MIS would like to pick up this initiative of getting donations from all of you. And we will be working with our counterpart from the Philippine Marketing Association to distribute those masks to the needy. Okay. Now, having said that, today it's also a quite a unique day for us. Now, MIS, we are supporting the stay-at-home SG, all right, stay-home SG itself. So therefore, we're coming up with initiative like this, a week-long. In fact, we will be extending our webinar to, in fact, right to the end of the lockdown period, our circuit breaker period itself. So therefore, do look out for more speakers coming on board. And of course, today, like what I said, is a special day for us. We will be conducting our Learn Basic Conversational English. Now, this is actually to support our foreign workers that are being locked down in their dormitories right now. All right, so that something to keep them by, to learn, so that they can learn skills such as conversational English. All right, and of course, it's not restricted to just our dormitory workers from Bangladesh, our friends from Bangladesh, from India, from China, including. All right, so do look out. So if you have your family members and would like to pick up English, this is a very good time to actually pick up. All right. So what you can do is that scan on the QR code that we have, and just have to fill in your names and your phone number, and there you have it. Right. You are able to actually log on online for free conversational English. And I believe today our trainer is Brenda. I've spoken with her, a very interesting lady, power lady itself. All right, humorous at the same time. So we're gonna have our sessions between 7 to 9 p.m. Right, it's 2 hours for 10 sessions, and all these are free. Okay, it's our contributions towards the community. Hopefully, it will actually help to lighten up the stress that our foreign workers are having right now in being locked in their dormitories. Okay. Now, having said that, I think enough of saying more. I think at this time, let me introduce our speakers for today. And he's none other than Mr. Kevin Ryan. Now, Mr. Kevin Ryan is a very experienced conference speaker itself, a workshop leader, facilitator, and of course, an MC, okay? So he has 25 years of experience as a corporate trainer and 15 years of experience as a professional speaker. Now, another of Kevin's achievement include column writer. So he's a columnist for industrial magazines, co-authoring 9 books on business communication skills and humor in business, just to name a few. So, listener, you probably will expect some humors coming from Kevin today. All right. So at this time, shall we invite Kevin into our room, please? All right. Round of applause, Kevin. Yeah, Kevin. Hi, Kevin.
Thank you, Roger.
Hi, great.
What an impressive round of
So we're very excited to hear from you today. You'll be sharing the art of presenting with charts and figures. So take it on, Kevin. All right, let's our viewers please enjoy the session that Kevin will be sharing with us. Okay, all right, take it on, Kevin.
Thank you, Roger, and welcome everyone. I hope you are enjoying or have enjoyed your lunch. And what I'm going to try and do is share with you in the short time that we have together the key principles that I have learned. As Roger mentioned, I've been working in the area of communication skills for many areas, but over the last 10 years, I've noticed that most of the presentations that people are doing tend to have a lot of data in them. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and show you ways in which I have helped people to be able to share data in a way that doesn't become an issue. I'm going to bring up my slideshow now. And I'll even turn off my video to stop it distracting you. Please feel free to enter any questions into the Q&A area, as Roger has mentioned. The main issue with presenting with charts and figures are a number of them. And what I'm going to try and cover in this particular lunchtime is to share with you some useful hints whenever you're doing a presentation which has data in it. And over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you how you might be able to select the data that's available to you, because most of the time now we have too much data available to us, and we tend to share more than is necessary and more than our audience can actually relate to. I will try and share with you some hints about how you might format that data so it becomes more attractive to the people who are listening and who are watching, and also so it becomes more memorable to them. That's interesting. My apologies for that. So, yeah, just as a little reminder, I'll also be showing you how you can actually arrange that data in a way that's going to give you the outcome that you possibly want. And hopefully, it's going to help you to make it more persuasive. Generally, we share data with other people because we are trying to get them to act or do something different to what they would have done before we share with them our information. And so what I'm going to do is help you to find ways in which you can actually allow this data to be a little bit more than just data sharing, but actually help you to achieve the purpose. There's a lot of comparisons between using data in presentations and in baking a cake. When we bake a cake, we take a group of relatively uninteresting ingredients like flour and sugar and eggs, and we put it together and we create something beautiful and delicious. But to be able to do that, we need to be able to have a recipe which is going to give us the right ingredients, which is going to help us to put those ingredients together in the right order, and also helps us to determine the timing that we need to be able to use in our particular baking exercise. And it's also the same with sharing data, because if we don't do that when we're baking, then we end up with a fairly sad outcome. And it's often the same with many presentations as well. Sometimes speakers should come with a warning, because they have so much data available to them that it tends to overwhelm their audience and sometimes even puts them to sleep. Because what happens most of the time is we are not giving presentations, we are giving data dumps. We are simply dumping a whole lot of data onto people and expecting them to be able to make some sense out of that. We are contributing to their information overload. We all suffer from information overload nowadays, and what you are trying to do is get them to be able to add new information to an already overloaded brain. And we experience what I call numberness. And I think those of us who are, or all in the world nowadays, we are living through a particular pandemic where every morning when we look at the newspaper or we look at the news, we are overwhelmed with figures. What percentage of people have been tested? What percentage of the people who've been tested have actually proven positive? What percentage of people have been admitted to hospital? Of the percentage of people that have been admitted to hospital, what percentage are in ICU? And after a while, we just get numberness. It just overwhelms us and it ceases to make any sense whatsoever. The trouble is that most organizations and speakers have more data than they can possibly use. They have a data that has been collated and collected from so many different sources, but they struggle to be able to have that data make sense. And the point I want to make is that often with data, what we do is we tend to be a floodlight. We tend to put all of the data in front of people, and the experience for them is very similar to somebody experiencing looking at a monochrome picture like you're seeing at the moment. And because there is so many images there, you're not quite sure where to look. And that's what we tend to be as communicators when we are undisciplined, is we are a floodlight. And my suggestion is you should not be a floodlight, you should be a spotlight. You should be telling people that you know about all the data out there, but you are making a conscious decision to be able to spotlight the important data for them, to be able to help them to take away what is the really important message that you want to share with them. Anytime that we communicate with people, what we need to be able to do is first of all decide three things. We need to know the why, we need to know the what, and we need to know the how. And these decisions should always be made before we even think about what data we are going to share with the group. With why, we need to know what is the purpose of speaking to this particular group of people and sharing this information with them. Are we trying to get them to remember something? Are we trying to get them to understand something? Or are we trying to persuade them or motivate them to think or act differently after they've heard our particular presentation? Then once we know what the purpose of our presentation is, we then move into selecting what data we will actually share with them. And that data comes in two categories. As I mentioned before, we need to know what we're going to spotlight, what data we are really going to highlight for them to be able to help them to truly understand the message we want to take away. But then also, what data will we use to be able to give background, to be able to provide a context, a contrasting point, a comparison point, something which will make the data that we want to spotlight make sense. And then we need to decide how we're going to share it with them. What structure will we use? Will we be able to structure the information so we can put it in terms that the audience can actually relate to? And how will we sequence the information we want to share with them to be able to achieve our desired purpose when we are speaking with a particular group? Most of the time, when we are speaking to a group, we are looking at information and we are looking at a data transfer. And my suggestion is we need to go to a higher level and look at actually turning that data transfer into creating empowering insights for our listeners. Daniel Pink, a very clever New York Times bestseller, said about 4 years ago, because people are suffering from information overload, they no longer value information. What they value are insights. Insights that allow them to feel more empowered about being able to make the important decisions that they need to make for their business and for their life. And so what we need to do is we need to take knowledge and actually turn that knowledge into understanding. Information is not knowledge, knowledge is not understanding, understanding is not wisdom. But we need to be able to turn that knowledge into understanding that people can genuinely integrate into their current view of the world. And then when we have data, which as we know can be fairly dry, we need to be able to bring that to life with images and emotions. I'm not sure if I'm telling you anything that you don't already know, but I have discovered over many years that speaking is a lousy way to transfer information. People don't listen very well, they don't concentrate very well, their memory is not as good as they would like to think it can be, and many of them think they can multitask. And as far as I'm concerned, there's no such thing as multitasking. There is just doing lots of things at the same time and not doing any of them very well. But speaking is a brilliant way to be able to help them to prioritize information, for them to be able to take the information and recognize that this is really important. I need to be able to give this information some time and some space in my brain to be able to allow me to truly appreciate this new valuable information that is more important than the existing information that I already have in my brain. If we're ever going to share anything with another human being, we need to understand how they actually process that information. And very quickly, I'm going to share with you the 3-step process. First of all, it goes into what's called our visual sensory register. It then moves on to our short-term memory, and it then goes into our long-term memory. And our visual sensory register, which happens before we're even consciously aware of that, is actually based, interestingly, mostly around colors and patterns. We're not even getting to figures and quantities yet. And what I'd like to do is be able to share with you just a couple of minutes from the brilliant David McCandless. David McCandless wrote this lovely book called Information is Beautiful. And I'd just like to share with you just 1 or 2 minutes of great wisdom from David McCandless.
Visualizers now, we're all demanding a visual aspect to our information. And there's something almost quite magical about visual information. It's effortless, it literally pours it in. And if you're navigating a dense information jungle, coming across a beautiful graphic or a lovely data visualization, it's a relief. It's like coming across a clearing in the jungle. And I was curious about this, so it led me to the work of a Danish physicist called Tor Nørretranders. He converted the bandwidth of the senses into computer terms. So here we go. This is your senses, pouring into your senses every second. Your sense of sight is the fastest. It has the same bandwidth as a computer network. Then you have touch, about the speed of a USB key. And then you have hearing and smell, which has the throughput of a hard disk. And then you have poor old taste, which is like barely the throughput of a pocket calculator. And that little square in the corner, 0.7%. That's the amount we're actually aware of. So a lot of your vision is pouring, the bulk of it is visual and it's pouring in, it's unconscious. And the eye is exquisitely sensitive to patterns in variations in color, shape, and pattern. It loves them, it calls them beautiful. It's the language of the eye. And if you combine the language of the eye with the language of the mind, which is about words and numbers and concepts, you start speaking two languages, each enhancing.
Brian, we can't hear the audio from your video format. You probably will have to increase the volume a lot more.
So we can use this new kind of language.
I'm sorry, did you say you can't hear the video?
Language, if you like, to alter our perspective or change our views. Let me ask you a simple question with a really simple answer. Who has the biggest military budget? It's got to be America, right? Massive. 609 billion in 2008, 607 rather. So massive, in fact, that it can contain all the other military budgets in the world inside itself. Gobble, 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 gobble. Now, you can see Africa's total debt there and the UK budget deficit for reference. So that might well chime with your view that America is a sort of warmongering military machine out to overpower the world with its huge industrial military complex. But is it true that America has the biggest military budget? Because America is an incredibly rich country. In fact, it's so massively rich that it can contain the 4 other top industrialized nations' economies inside itself. It's so vastly rich. So its military budget is bound to be enormous. So to be fair and to alter our perspective, we have to bring in another data set. That data set is GDP, or what the country's earning. Who has the biggest budget as a proportion of GDP? Let's have a look. That changes the picture considerably. Other countries pop into view that you perhaps weren't considering, and America drops into 8th. And you can also do this with soldiers. Who has the most soldiers? It's got to be China, of course, 2.1 million. And again, chiming with your view that China has a militarized regime ready to, mobilize its enormous forces. But of course, China has an enormous population. So if we do the same, we see a radically different picture. China drops to 124th. It actually has a tiny army when you take other data into consideration. So absolute figures like the military budget in a connected world kind of don't give you the whole picture. They're not as true as they could be. We need relative figures that are connected to other data so that we can see a fuller picture. And then that can lead to us changing our perspective.
My apologies for not letting you hear the first few seconds of the audio there, but hopefully you heard the second part of it. And the main message I wanted you to take away from that was not only how we need to be able to put data into context so as it makes sense for people, but also to be able to show you the lovely graphics that he actually used, how he incorporated not just showing us figures, but also graphical representations to be able to give us some sense of the actual size. Here's a good example about the images. The Tropicana story is famous in marketing back in about 2009. One of the most popular brands of fruit juice in the United States. They changed their brand. They changed their typeface. They kept the colors pretty much the same, but simply by changing the typeface, they managed to lose 20% of their sales within 2 weeks, and within a month, they'd actually gone back to the old packaging. Best Buy, which is a well-known technology retailer in the United States, changed their brand and made the mistake of changing their primary color in their brand. All of a sudden, customers would walk past their store and not even be able to recognize the store anymore. And so once we've actually gone into through that visual sensory register, and the brain will actually then process it, and if it sees it relevant, it will actually take it through and will be able to absorb 3 to 9 chunks of information in any one sitting. And 9 is by far the maximum for somebody who's concentrating really, really well. I would suggest for most of us, it's closer to 3. And the good thing about being able to use appropriate graphics and to be able to show data visually is that with a good visual representation, I can take 3 or 4 pieces of data and incorporate that into one chunk. So if I was to share that with people separately, I would very quickly reach the limit of what they are able to absorb. But by rearranging the information in a more interesting way, I'm able to get them to absorb more and then take that and put it into their long-term memory. Here's 2 examples. I'm not sure if you're aware, but Jupiter at last count had 79 moons. And this graphic really helps me to be able to understand that. And those of you who might have dogs, I love this particular graphic where somebody has actually managed to show a massive amount of information. The popularity of the dog, the intelligence, the cost, the longevity, the grooming, the ailments that they're susceptible to, their appetite, even to the point, depending on which way they're facing, whether they're a smart dog or a not so smart dog. A lot of information shown just in one very, very simple graphic. But the message I want you to take away is to think If they can only take away 3 pieces of data, please, you choose what those 3 pieces of data will be. Don't let them choose it, because they will choose ones that might be relevant to them, but are not the ones that you want to take them to take away. And so the main message is to remember, if they're only going to retain 3, what will they be? I'd like to share with you some very simple formatting tips. Some of these seem really, really obvious, but in my experience, I've seen them violated so often that it's worth spending a minute or two just mentioning those. Think about decimal separators. Some cultures use commas, some use full stops, some use spaces. You'll even in this one language, for example, Spain and Mexico, both with the same common language, actually use different decimal separators. And so think about the group that you're going to be speaking to and think about what number format they're used to looking at. Choose a font that allows them to make easy comparison. On the left-hand side there, I've chosen a normal font. On the right-hand side is another font, but when you put it into numbers, it moves them around in all the spaces, and it makes it very, very difficult for people to be able to make valid comparisons. Also, try and use a date format that they are familiar with. When we look at that date, some of us might see it as the 2nd of August, some of us might see it as the 8th of February. So just be aware of the people that you're actually speaking to, and sometimes I'll actually put the month in writing there just to be able to save any possible confusion. Size, the eye is fairly poor, even though it's good at recognizing shapes and patterns. It is fairly poor at being able to do comparisons. And so if I wanted to be able to show a certain amount of money and then show something which is actually 3 times that, it doesn't actually get that impact. And I might be better just using multiple icons to be able to more clearly get that message across. You need to remember how people read. And for most of the people we'll be speaking to, they will read from left to right and then from top to bottom. And you need to always remember that whenever you're putting any information in front of them, because you need to make sure that you can actually, if people are going to be reading information in that way, that the order in which they are reading it suits your particular purpose. For example, if I was doing a comparison between a certain factor in the United States and a certain factor in Singapore, if I wanted them to first of all think about what the issues are in the United States and then compare it to Singapore, I might use that graphic. But if I wanted them to think about Singapore first and then compare it to what is happening in the United States, I would use a different map and I'd use a different graphic to be able to help people, because they find it more natural to move their head from left to right when they are absorbing any new information. Also need to think about the fact when they're reading from top to bottom, where do you want, if you want to be able to show your company's results compared to competitors. On the left-hand side, I'm putting your company's results first. On the right-hand side, I'm putting your company's results at the bottom. All depending on what you want them to think about, whether you want them on the left-hand side to see you as an industry leader, slightly ahead of the rest of the competition, or on the right-hand side where you have a clear margin ahead of number 2, you might set people up by giving them the initial figures and then impressing them by giving your company's results as the last figure that they hear. Left digit bias affects even the most intelligent. We've all seen the $9.99 that's sometimes been used. Here's an example that actually comes from some of the most intelligent people, general practitioners. In an experiment that was only done last year, the general practitioners were given 2 types of patients. One patient who was 79 years and 48 weeks old, and another patient who was 80 years and 2 weeks old. Both of these patients were candidates for open heart surgery. What they found is that the surgeons, 25% more surgeons recommended open heart surgery for the person who was 79 years and 48 weeks than recommended it for the person who was 80 years and 2 weeks, even though there was only 4 weeks difference in their age, because all they did was they saw that first number. The left digit bias affects even the most intelligent people in our society. So you need to think about the order in which you introduce the data, because the order in which you introduce the data affects its impact. Everything in the world is comparative. Our brain is hyper-comparative, and all we do is we tend to compare to something we already have in our brain. Here's an interesting experiment I often do with groups. And only a couple of months ago, I had a group of about 40 people in the room. And what I did was I broke them into two groups of 20. The first group, I showed them this particular scene. I called them Group A. And I asked them this question: does this room cost more or less than $5,500 per night? And then what I did was I asked them the question, what do you think this room costs per night? And I got them to write that figure down on a piece of paper that we collected. I then took the rest of the room, calling them Group B, showed them a very similar picture, and then asked them the same question, but with a different figure. Does this room cost more or less than $55 per night? And then again, the same exercise, asking them what the room cost per night and asking them to write that down on a piece of paper. We collated all of the different figures, and it's probably no surprise to you, Group A, when we collated it, came out with an average cost they thought the room was worth of $2,500 a night. Group B came up with an average cost of $250 a night. A massive difference in what they expected, all impacted on by the fact that I had put an initial figure in their mind that acted as their reference point. Recently, in fact, the last conference I attended where I was able to sit in a room with other people, one of the speakers stood up and said, our businesses that in their particular industry make a net profit of 30%. And the impact on the audience was not what they expected, because most of us were thinking, well, compared to what? And so my suggestion, if that person was doing that presentation again, is that would give the information in an industry where 15% net profit was the norm. We made 30%. Putting that 15% as a reference point in their mind first meant that when you gave them the figure you wanted them to remember, it had the right impact. When you represent information, please do not be tempted to use more complex graphics than you actually need to do. Sometimes simple, clear graphics to show connections, to show correlations, to show a causal link, to be able to show interdependency, or to be able to show commonalities. A simple, clear line graphic can sometimes give great clarity to your audience, and sometimes forcing yourself to try and find one can help you to clarify your message with them as well. There's more of them again, and probably one of the most famous presentations from the last 15 years has been the brilliant Simon Sinek, who gave us the principle of start with why, and anyone who's seen that video notices he does it with 3 circles on a flip chart. No fancy graphics, but creates a lasting, memorable message with the 3 circles drawn on a flip chart. Very quickly, here are some of the alternatives that you can actually use when you are sharing information with the group. You can use the typical tables or bar charts or histograms or stacked bar charts. You can use slope charts or unit charts or stacked areas. You can use bump charts or scatter charts or bubble charts. You can use pie charts or tree maps or Gantt charts, or you can use Sankey diagrams or organizational charts, network diagrams, or even geographical charts. And these are only about 25 of the 60 or so most common graphic formats that I might suggest to you. I just wanted to give you some idea of the range that might be available. One that I like to use a lot, and what I'm showing you here, and there's even some more, is a 9-step plan that I use to be able to help people put together a successful, persuasive presentation. And what I will do, and it's a modality that quite often people are seeing used in a piece of technology called Prezi, it allows me to be able to show them the bigger picture. And then what I'll do is I'll focus, and let's look at step 3. And then I'll actually go back to see where step 3 fits into the larger context. And then I'll move on, and maybe we'll focus on step 6, and then move back to be able to show them where step 6 fits into the larger context. And so that ability to be able to zoom in and to zoom out, I think, is really, really important at being able to help people to understand finer detail, but then be able to move on to be able to understand the context of that information and how they might integrate it into their existing knowledge and their existing information. Show you some examples now of what I think are graphic mistakes that people make and how they might maybe be addressed. What you're seeing there is a static bar graph. And I made the commitment to myself many, many years ago that once I realized that static graphs are boring, that I would never create another bar graph that was just static and didn't have some movement. And so now if I'm showing that same graph nowadays, what I'll do is I'll involve some animation in it. I'll actually make the bar graph move. The movement draws your eye. You're not sure how far it's going to move, and so it creates curiosity and creates impact and engagement where a static graph will really struggle. If you're ever going to show people a graph, please don't confuse them. Here's one that I found where the graphic is totally misleading because you're seeing one person, and once you see that one person as a graphic, your assumption is that all of the figures should add up to be 100%. Now, that information is quite valid, but the numbers are not self-exclusionary, and so they don't add up to 100%. Many people will try and start adding up those figures. They will see that it adds up to a lot more than 100%. It will confuse them, and the message you will leave them with will be confusion rather than the message you're trying to share with them. Here's what happens when you allow our military people to be able to get together and to put together. This was a graph put together to try and help people understand the interactions between different groups in Afghanistan. And I'm not sure if it helped anyone, but it has now become known as the spaghetti diagram. In the software available to us nowadays, we have many lovely graphic features. One of them is the ability to be able to turn things into 3-dimensional shapes rather than 2-dimensional shapes. The trouble is, if you do that, be aware of the fact that you're probably skewing the message that you are giving with the audience. You might think it looks a little bit more modern and a little bit more interesting, but really what it's doing is it's giving them the wrong impression altogether, and really is compromising the quality of your communication. Other ways in which people have been able to manipulate information to be able to give you an incorrect impression. I'm sure as audience members you've had this done to you, but also whenever you are doing presentations, please make sure that you don't fall into this trap. So here is a comparison where the whole impetus was to try and make Group A look good, but they manipulated the whole information by not starting the y-axis at 0. And if there needs to be a very, very good reason why you would not start the y-axis on any graph at 0. And so when we started at 0, we see the fact that there is not nearly as much difference between the different groups' performance as might be initially indicated by the first graph. Here is another one where what they've done is they've manipulated the figures to be able to make a whole process look much flatter because they've used an irrelevant reference point on the y-axis. Whereas if we actually use a valid reference point, then all of a sudden we're able to see the variations much clearer in a way that helps us to be able to understand that message. Also, we have to be aware of the fact that we can sometimes fall into the trap. We only want to share them the information that suits our particular purpose. We have to be careful that people are very cynical about that. So what we're looking at there is the confirmed cases of this particular pandemic between the 22nd of January and the 19th of March. And if you look at that, it's quite terrifying. But then if I add the other information into that graph, which actually shows you not just the number of cases, but a comparison between the number of cases, the number of recoveries, and the flattening number of deaths, then you get a much fuller picture of the current situation around the world. Pie graphs, and this is a pie graph. Basic rule with pie graphs, you never use a pie graph for more than 6 categories. After that, it becomes irrelevant. But this is the sort of pie graph that is generated if you just use the smart graphics that comes out of Microsoft Excel. It's an easy option, but it makes it very difficult for people to be able to try and follow all of the data that you're trying to share with them. And so if you look at that picture there, you'll see the basic principle that by making something spotlighted, rather than being the floodlight, being the spotlight, then you can determine what you are drawing people's eye to. And so with this particular graph, I was trying to get people to relate to the results coming from Singapore. And so Singapore was the one in color. All the rest were in various shades of gray. And because graphics can sometimes, as I mentioned before, be rather dry, I needed to involve a little bit of emotional content in this particular graph. And the simplest way I could do that was simply by changing names to the national flags. And once I did that, people felt more of an emotional connection to the figures that I was sharing. And then I simply put it onto a background that made it more relevant to the part of the world where all of this was happening. Here is a classic example of where a very complex graph that looks very attractive, which is that one on the left, initially looks very attractive, but is very, very difficult to be able to glean information from. And if you are trying to look at the top 10 salaries, in what category they are and what are the range of those salaries in Google, then the simple bar graph on the right-hand side gives you that information much more clearly, much more quickly than the fancy graphic on the left-hand side. Here's one that was released in my country, Australia, only yesterday, and these are the businesses that have been affected by the current pandemic. And I thought I'd show you this because this information, the weekly data, the line graph, looks rather confusing and doesn't really give you any clear information. But that nice bar graph there, which shows either the minus figures or the positive figures, very, very quickly gives you the information about, even though some businesses have suffered, obviously some have actually done better out of this than they might have otherwise. When we get data, what we've got is we've got the framework. And the framework is very, very important to be able to create a house, but it's not going to be a house that anybody wants to live in. And so if you're going to be able to bring your data alive, what you need to do is you need to be able to be aware of the brain and how it's going to process that information. We have the neocortex, we have the limbic brain, and we have the reptilian brain. The neocortex is very, very good at processing the facts and the figures and the data that we have available for them. The limbic brain can only process images and emotions and has no capacity for language. And we need to remember that all decisions come from the limbic brain. And I pay full credit to Simon Sinek for being the first person to make the rest of us outside the area of neuroscience aware of this. So that means that the facts and figures by themselves will never be enough to convince anyone. You need to bring those facts and figures alive with some images and emotions. Here is the main message for all communicators. Logic makes them think, emotion makes them act. And every presentation that we give must be a combination of both logic and emotion. I'm going to show you just a very quick 2-minute video from this brilliant lady, Cole Nussbaum-Knaflick. Used to work at Google, and here she's going to give you some good information from this brilliant book called Storytelling with Data.
can recall a time when I was working with one of the junior analysts on our team. And she had just finished analyzing Google-Geist results from the annual employee survey for a given part of the organization, and was getting ready to communicate those results to the leader of that team. And this particular team had been struggling in a lot of places. The scores weren't great, so there was some sensitivity around how that message should be delivered. And the deck at that point was page after page after page of the standard report. No story and little narrative to tie it all together. Would have been very easy for the leader of that group to say, oh, that's interesting, and move on to the next thing. That would have been a failure. So what I had the analyst do was set the deck aside and tell me the story. Tell me what you learned when you were analyzing this data. And when we did that, the articulation of the story was super powerful. There were clear areas for improvement, and she knew exactly where to focus action to achieve that improvement. This we could use to light a fire under the leader for that team. So it's a good example of how data without story isn't always so meaningful, but the story can help bring the data to life. So when I think about how we can leverage that power when we are communicating with data every time we're doing it.
So the point that Cole was sharing with us there is the importance of stories. Efficiently told, effective stories that combine logic and emotion. And if you're looking at adding stories to your data, here is a very quick list of the type of stories that you might use. There's the eureka story. I found it. I discovered it. The moment of realization, the moment of invention. It might be the turning point story, when your organization or you personally made a significant turning point in your life. The why the story stands for what I didn't expect to happen. People are always fascinated with not what was expected to happen, but what surprised you in the overall narrative of sharing this data with them. The methodology story, how you actually made things happen in a consistent process. The implication in context story, like I mentioned before, the zooming in and zooming out, the small detail, but then showing how that fits into the larger strategy of the organization. The parallel stories, about a story about how some particular piece of data has impacted on one organization, and then how another organization has been differently impacted by that. The why story, the founding story, why your organization was founded, and how later on you are still able to keep true to that original purpose. And the data discovery story, as Cole had just explained to us a minute ago, what you discovered whilst you were actually unearthing all of this data. And so if we think about the process of any organization as it goes through the ups and downs, and you could start out with the why story, you could have the eureka story, which allows us to be able to go on to an increasing path, the methodology story about how we systemize that, the implication story about how that was changed when we were becoming an industry leader, the parallel story when we suffered a particular downturn, the wither story that we didn't expect things to happen because it continued to go down, the turning point story about how we actually brought it back out again, the parallel story about how we were affected and other organizations were affected, and then looking back about how the data actually impacted on us. And so I'd encourage you, never share data without bringing it to life. The data is just a skeleton. You have to breathe life into it. You have to put flesh and bones or flesh and blood on those bones to be able to bring it to life. And so in wrapping up, I just want to share with you the points that I've tried to cover in this session today. First of all, know why you are including data. Don't share it with them just because you've got it. It will just confuse people and it will contribute to their information overload. Combine your data into chunks, being aware of the fact that most people can only take away 3 chunks, and you need to decide if they're only going to be able to remember 3 chunks, which 3 chunks they will actually remember. You need to format the information for clarity so people don't get overcome by numberness and the numbers simply become meaningless to them. You need to choose the graphic that suits your purpose, not the one that you will think will impress them most with your technical ability, but the one that will actually get across the message that you want them to take away. You need to deliver your data with power to make sure you deliver it with genuine impact, and you need to transform your data with images and emotions to be able to make sure that you combine that logic and emotion to be able to create a memorable message for them. Some recommended reading for you. The wonderful Guy Reynolds many years ago created Presentation Zen and Presentation Zen Design. You've had a couple of words from David McCandless. I highly recommend his book, and also Cole Nussbaum-Knaflic, her wonderful book, Storytelling with Data. I'd highly actually recommend that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to come back to see what we have in the way of questions, and maybe to ask Roger if he has any comments he'd like to make.
Hi, Kevin. Amazing. Sorry, I think I'm trying to get my visual. Well, Kevin, I should say it's really a fantastic presentation today. I'm surprised. You know what? You managed to keep me on the edge of my seats. Okay,
very kind of you.
Really wonderful. But you know what? Seriously, all this being done, the information that you've shared with us, the slides that you've shared with us over this just very short period of time, over in less than an hour, I think it doesn't do justice. You know something? Just to share with you what happens among me and my guys. I was telling my guys constantly, this is the way that slides should have been done. You know. My God! Wow, I'm really bombarded with a lot of good slides, and you certainly practice what you preach. From your slides itself, fantastic. Now, from time to time, I've seen a lot of presentations, and they are always very cluttered. The clarity is not there. I think it really takes just some effort, some good efforts in really making the slides clear in terms of clarity of the slides. So I think you have actually presented a lot of things for us that we're able to utilize. Thanks, Kevin. That's really fantastic. Now, at this time, we'd like to open up the floors, the Q&As to the floors itself. Now, I've got one question coming in from Ms. Yoni, or Mr. Yoni, I hope. Now, the question goes as, you have touched briefly on animations, but can you please talk more about your opinion about using animations?
Thank you, and great question. I think those of us who have been around for a long time would remember the times when people used to over-animate every slide, when people used to actually use those little sound effects when something used to appear on the slide. It was all very interesting, but it was one of those classic examples of just because we have the technology available to us, should we use it, or maybe should we not use it? And so my suggestion to you is, the animation is there to draw the eye. What do you want to actually draw the watchers or the listener's eye towards? And make sure that you're using your animations sparingly, but purposefully, to be able to bring up the key point when you actually need it. I mean, one of the easiest animations, many of us, I try to avoid them, but many of us sometimes get caught with slides where there are a number of bullet points on the actual slide. And sometimes that's unavoidable. And when we are presenting in this type of modality, rather than face-to-face, I would suggest that you tend to use slides with more words on it, because you are trying to help people to cope with the technology, maybe their lack of ability to understand clearly when they're listening through their own limited technology. And so I would recommend there, if you're going to be putting a number of bullet points up, please use the animation to bring the bullet points in as you're actually speaking about them. Do not put up four bullet points and then start speaking to them one at a time, because at least 50% of your audience will be reading ahead, will be seeing which point that they think is most interesting, and will simply be waiting for you to get to the point that they think is most interesting and not concentrating on what you want them to concentrate on. So use animations to be able to direct their attention. Don't use it just to try and create some bit of movement because you think it might be more interesting.
Great advice from Kevin. Now, we do have some questions coming in, but well, they post it on the chat instead of the Q&A segment. Sorry, let me address to one or two of those questions. What would your advice be to match the corporate slides colors? I think here you're referring to what is the best slides. What are the colors that would be great for corporate slides?
Great idea. I mean, the power of colors. When I was looking for examples of times when people had made mistakes in their marketing and changed their brand or changed their logo, most of the time they were smart enough to at least maintain the same colors. Because I've had many examples in my own sales experience of when colors have been inadvertently changed and all of a sudden people can't simply find it. I mean, try looking for something in your house when you're imagining that what you're looking for is a different color to what it actually is. You won't be able to find it. Having said that, if you can actually use the colors, your corporate colors, to be able to highlight key points, or if you're showing, for example, I saw a really nice graphic recently which showed the different reach of the different social media platforms, and they actually used the Facebook color, the Instagram color, the Snapchat color, because people were instantly able to relate to that. Somebody's asked about good websites where you can get free different chart type format. There is actually a group, and I'll leave it to you to actually look it up on Google, but it's actually called the Data Presentation Society. And it's a group of people, a little bit like me and other slightly nerdy people who spend their life presenting data. And it's a really rich forum of people who are interested in making data more interesting and more relevant, and being able to make sense out of massive amounts of data. It's free to join, and I highly recommend that as a good example of where you can see the latest thinking on good graphic representation.
Great piece of advice over there, Kevin. Kevin, I do have a personal questions that I want to ask you. All right. Now, from well, I just have to be frank with you today. When you told me that you have about 70 over slides, I was like, wow, you know, the most slides you've ever seen over the past few days. But it seems like, you know, in fact, we didn't get enough of all the slides. So a question to be posted to you would be, what do you think would be a good amount of slides to be presented before we get fatigued or your audience get fatigued over listening to you and things like that? What will your advice be?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Roger. And that's come from information that I've heard, going back many, many years when PowerPoint first became ubiquitous and all speakers were using it, and people actually, in trying to be helpful, gave advice that you should only have, for a 20-minute presentation, you should have no more than one slide per minute. And as far as I'm concerned, that's totally irrelevant, because some slides I will speak to for 5 minutes. Other slides, like for example, when I was trying to create, I didn't want you to look at the detail of all the different graphic slide representations. I simply wanted to put 28 slides or 28 different graphic formats in front of you very, very quickly to be able to create an impression, not to be able to share any specific information with you. That was just to create an impression. And so I went through each of those slides, showing you each slide for only about 2 or 3 seconds each. So I'm not able to give you a formula that'll actually say this is the right number of slides that you will need for your presentation. One thing that I would recommend to all presenters, even when you're presenting in this format, and I'll admit I broke my own rule just over the last hour, is at some stage turn your slideshow off and actually talk to the people, bring yourself back into the presentation. It's very, very easy for us to lose that human-to-human connection that we have, and that maybe in these isolation times we're starting to appreciate a little bit more, and we simply become a narrator to a slideshow. We use the slideshow as a preparation modality, and then we just think to ourselves, what am I going to say to this slide? When really what you should be thinking is, what am I going to say to this audience, and how are the slides going to help them to understand that?
Excellent point. Okay, I do have some questions coming up on the Q&A. The very first one will be from Jerry Yao. Now, Jerry is actually from our colleagues from Philippines. Now, the question goes as, will sound with the animated PowerPoints do the trick? Would you suggest to use sound?
Generally, no. And that's because of the fact that in the past people were used to the weird little cartoony type sounds that people used to use to move things into a slideshow. So generally no, but sometimes sound can actually add a level of emotion that cannot be achieved at any other time. I have sometimes used a small piece of music to be able to show one particular slide almost as a piece of background music, but a piece of music that I know has an emotional connection for that particular audience. So I would encourage people to think about, now that our computers can handle more processing than they used to years ago, I would encourage people to actually think about that.
Okay, great. Now I have another questions from our participants. What would be a good balance for the percentage of pictures to use versus the percentage of text to be used in a presentation?
I always try to look for the minimum amount of text. Now, having said that, when I'm doing presentations via Zoom or a similar modality, I will probably put a few more words on the slide. That's just to compensate for the fact that people might not understand my accent, or maybe their audio feed might not be as clear as it should be. So I am very, very strict with myself. And given the modality of presenting face-to-face, if I'm going to put words on there, I always think, what words should I put on there? How can I use less words? How can I use one or two words rather than a full sentence? Because if I force the audience to read, they've got to make a choice between either reading what's on my slide or listening to me. And given that choice, I'd rather they listen to me.
Agree. I think a very good piece of advice over here. Otherwise, you'll probably just be showing them slideshows instead of having you to speak to them. Correct?
Well, also sometimes because PowerPoint has become so ubiquitous and because it's such an easy piece of software to start using, sometimes we fall into the trap of using the PowerPoint slides as our prompt notes. And I can always see when the PowerPoint slides have been created more for the speaker as a memory prompt for them, rather than for the audience as a piece of engagement for the audience.
True enough, true enough. Okay, the next question would be, what is the font size you would recommend to use on slides that are not very text heavy, and does that text heavy itself? Sorry, I'm trying to figure out what she's asking. Okay, I think, what are the fonts?
I can see the different points there. I tend to keep the very simple fonts. And font size can vary enormously. I mean, a 20-point Calibri and 20-point Arial will look totally different on the screen. So my general rule is I start at 24-point Arial. And if anything's going to be smaller than that, then I'm very, very, very strict on myself. I mean, I'm sure we've all had experiences of sitting in the room, having the presenter put up a slide, and then starting out with an apology. Now, you won't be able to read this, but, and you can almost hear the collective groan from the audience. Please don't ever fall into that trap.
Okay, true. All right. Which will bring me to my next questions. What's your advice in managing the allocated time during presentations? I thought this question would be good to be posed.
Yeah. Very, very valid, and I hope you don't mind, Roger, me sharing with you. As you said earlier on, when I told you how many slides I have for my presentation, I saw the look of fear in your eyes, and then I actually said to you, but by this particular time, I will be showing this last slide. That may mean that I might need to skip a few slides, and as somebody who earns their living as a professional speaker, the rule always is a professional finishes on time. So if I've got a 40-minute presentation, I will have the ability to be able to reduce that down by at least 25%, down to a 30-minute presentation and still be confident that the audience has been able to get the main message that I want them to get. Because you don't know when things are going to take longer than you require. You don't know when things are going to, maybe the speaker before you is going to go over time. And if I know that people are expecting me to be finished by a certain time, then I know that every minute I speak after that, I'm actually intruding on the rest of their life in a way that's inconsiderate of them. So finishing on time is very important.
But I guess today we probably will need to stretch our time a little if it's okay with you. I think we've got a couple of questions coming in.
Yeah, well, if I didn't have the authority of the president of the Marketing Institute of Singapore to give me the authority to break that rule, I would I'd be feeling very uncomfortable. But now that you've given me permission, Roger, I'm happy to do that.
Certainly, most certainly. I think well, it's our value back to the audience, and of course, if they need to know more or learn more, right, they can always watch out for your courses coming up on our MIS platform, right? So we're going to present them later. Next question would be: we are presenting a video like the TED video that they've shown in your presentation. If we are presenting a video, right, like the TED video that they've shown in your presentation, do you need to seek information from the source or just give them credit in our slide? That's a very technical question, right?
It's a very technical question, and it gets into a very grey area of intellectual property. And I have spoken with many professional colleagues about this, and the general feeling is as long as we're showing a small snippet and making sure that we give full credit to where it is due. And you'll notice that before I'll show any video, I'll actually show a slide with the speaker's name on it and with their product on it. And then at the end, like I showed you with recommended reading, I also gave them another acknowledgement as well. I think that's just respectful.
Yeah, true enough. Which will bring me to my last questions from the audience. By Dylan Tan, I believe is the guy that I know. Okay, Dylan, hi. Your question would be, what is your advice to presenters who need to read from their slide and speak without it?
Okay, I'm glad Dylan's a friend of yours, because the advice about that is going to be rather brutal, which is if you're using your slideshow as prompt notes for yourself, then you're doing it all wrong. In PowerPoint, you have space to be able to put your notes. When you are showing a PowerPoint slideshow, you can put yourself into presenter view, and you can actually be able to check your notes that are there, that are separate from the slide that the audience is actually seeing. And if you are really intimidated, then there are now available a number of teleprompt apps. Now, the good teleprompt apps will cost you somewhere between $20 and $40 US, but it acts just like a professional teleprompter that they use, that the newsreaders use on television. I'll give you, there's one that I'm, a free service that you might want to try. And I apologize, I can't remember the name of the very clever 20-year-old who put this together. But there is a piece of free software called teleprompt.me, which anybody can access. You put some text in there and it will act like a genuine teleprompter. In other words, it will listen to your voice and will provide the script at the rate at which you are speaking.
I think that is the last questions that are being brought up by our attendees. Nevertheless, thanks so much, Kevin. I think really a wealth of information. I wish I probably can look at even more time. Now, for those listeners out here or attendees out here, if you want to find out more or on the art of presenting with charts and figures, I think you can always log on to our website. And at the same time, can I flash out the slides on the courses that Kevin will be conducting with MIS?
Yes, I put together a program which basically today was like the trailer to the movie of my actual program. So it's a very intensive, quite advanced interactive workshop where people will be working with their own slides and their own presentations. And I'll make sure that if they're involved in the program with me, they have found ways in which they can transform their slides and be able to go out and give a data-based presentation with more confidence than ever before. So what I tried to do today was basically share some basic principles with people, but I'd be delighted if anybody would want to spend more time with me for me to be able to share with them the strategies and the techniques that they can apply long-term for all of their presentations. Great.
I think we have two on, you have on the screen right now on the QR code. Hang on, it's not appearing on my screen right now. I have it. Okay, I think the attendees right now or the viewers are able to actually see the QR code. Can you put that up again, CK, please, on the QR code that we can actually scan to learn more about the courses that Mr. Kevin Rand will be conducting with MIS. There you have it, guys. Okay, so thanks, Kevin, for that great time, that great presentation. I believe all our viewers, I think they do achieve the objective today of wanting to learn more. I think more can be done. More can be done by attending the course on the art of presenting with charts and figures. Thank you, Kevin. All right. So having said that, I forgot because of the lockdown period itself that we will not be having our sessions tomorrow. So we're just going to keep the weekends free so that we can spend more time with family. Not that we are not spending enough time right now. So our next session on our MIS Lunchtime Webinar will be this coming Monday on the 27th of April, which is the same time, at 12:30. Now that's where we'll be touching on subjects as let me flash the slides up. Critical thinking, all right? I think this is our most important and will be by our next speaker in line, that will be Mr. Ivan Hua. So do join us on Monday lunchtime sessions. And before I log out, I would like to actually bring to your attention again that MIS will doing a donation drive on masks. So if you have masks or you think that you can contribute some of the masks to our neighboring countries such as Philippines, please look out for us. And that's a number over there that you can contact Ms. Judy and Ms. Aga itself. Now, this is actually our very small little way in trying to contribute to the community in our neighboring ASEAN countries. Starting from Philippines, we are actually asking for mass donations to be given to our communities in Philippines. So as you can see, mass is really a privilege for them. All right, unlike Singapore, we are given masks by our governments. They did a great job, but in Philippines itself, because of the sheer mass, a lot of them are unable to get their hands on the masks. So that's where we will be working with our partner and our counterpart in Philippines, the Philippine Marketing Association, and Gwen, the past president of the Philippine Marketing Association, and the immediate past president of the Asia Marketing Federation, to get it distributed to all the needy peoples around the region, especially in Philippines. Thank you. Thanks so much, Kevin. Thank you so much. I should say that I've learned a lot from you, and I'll probably will be the very first one to sign up for the course.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for your excellent facilitation. And thank you to MIS for the wonderful work they're doing, not only in education, but also in the charitable work as well. That's a wonderful initiative.
Thank you. Okay, so please, for the attendees out here, please look out for us on Monday again, and do join us on this coming Monday. Bye. We'll see you again. All right. Thank you.
Make more time.